I'm Howie Lim. This is Money Hacks by the Business Times. Experiencing a layoff shouldn't be daunting if you're financially prepared. But few would argue that being laid off isn't stressful. It not only compromises your finances, it can deal a blow to your self-confidence. Avoid letting your guard down and allowing circumstances to overwhelm you. What are some actionable steps you can follow to navigate this situation? Welcome to Money Hacks, a podcast series by the Business Times, where we explore useful financial tips to help you on your money managing and wealth growing journey. I'm Howie Lim. And if you have feedback or an idea for a podcast episode, do get in touch, btpodcasts@sph.com.sg. And helping us to figure this out today are Daphne Tan, Head of Business Development at CMC Markets Singapore, and Zach Ng, Financial Services Director, PhillipCapital.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for having me here.
So according to the World Economic Forum, 41% of companies globally anticipate reducing their workforces within the next 5 years. Why? What's driving this, and should we be worried? Here's Daphne Tan from CMC Markets Singapore.
It seems that the trend is actually business reorganization, and that can stem from a variety of things such as streamlining the cost structure, a change in strategic alignment. It could also be cost reduction and also matching the market reality. So it seems to be a deeper issue where external demand is weakening and companies are trying to align their strategies to that. At the moment, it doesn't seem to be an immediate cause of concern, but we need to see where this trend is going and if this persists. So if we look at the numbers, actually the number of retrenchments has declined from 2023 to 2024 by about 1,600. And in fact, the citizen unemployment rate has remained constant at 2.9%. So in which case, at the moment, the alarm bells are not ringing yet.
I mean, this whole situation started probably a few years ago before COVID, and following COVID, all this while, the interest rate has always been low. So a lot of companies, they are fed with a lot of easy money, so much so that they can actually just go on a hiring spree prior to that. And I think when 2022 came, there was this surge of inflation due to pent-up demand, and that caused interest rate to have to rise in order to temper all these inflationary pressures. At a point in time, a lot of companies, they have to relook at their finances, to see how they can actually tighten their belts to prepare for the worst of times. I still recall during those times, there was so much talk about recession, unemployment rate going up. People were just very worried. And likewise, I think a lot of companies are just trying to prepare for that. They have gone into this mode of retrenching, cutting the slack, so to speak. Thankfully, we are kind of out of that. I do observe that among my clients, some of the companies have started hiring again. Yeah, but of course not in a big fashion because they're still very worried about the comeback of inflation. The other key factor I would say is really the change in the technological landscape. In today's context, ChatGPT, artificial intelligence, and it has gotten to the level of sophistication that a lot of companies, they are relying more and more on technology. And as a company, I guess they will also have to relook at how they make their business operations more efficient. And therefore, it's inevitable that some of the workforce will have to go because of that.
That does not sound good. The proverbial being replaced by technology and Skynet happening. Okay, we're at that stage. There is the possibility of being laid off. What about the emergency fund? Because I've been hearing different things for some time now. Is it 3 to 6 months or 12 months? Here's Zach Ng from PhillipCapital.
That's a good question, actually, because there's really no one-size-fits-all solution for this. How much to save, it really depends on many factors. Whether you just enter the workforce, whether you're young, you have any financial commitment, whether you have a big family to support. And it also depends on the industry they are in, because some industries, they are just so cyclical in nature. It takes a long time before you can actually look for your next job. And some of the industries are also going down the hill, being replaced by technology and all those stuff. I think in order to answer that question, we will have to look at individual profile. But the general rule of thumb, most people will go for 3 to 6 months. I would say that is probably just right for someone who's young, just entered the workforce with very little financial commitment. For people who are a bit on the older side, they could be holding middle management positions in their late 30s to 40s. I would say that most of these people, they tend to have mortgages to pay, car loans to support, aging parents to support as well as young children. For this group of people, it's always prudent to have a more emergency fund on hand. So I would say maybe 12 months at least at a minimum. The reason why I said 12 months is also because if you think about it, our deposits in the bank is actually enjoying very good yields. There's a high interest rate. It's not exactly the money that is set aside in emergency fund. It's not working hard for you. It's still earning some kind of returns. And because of that, I think most people can actually afford to just put a bit more money set aside, 12 months of monthly expenses as part of the emergency fund for now.
12 months is probably a little to be safer. However, based on most of the people, 12 months may be a little bit far-fetched because people do still have discretionary spending, and when times are good, it is human nature to want to enjoy a little bit of life, in which case a minimum of 3 to 6 months is generally all right. But in recent times, if we look at the case studies of, let's say, last year, some of which came out in the news, it can take about 7 to 8 months to find a job for some cases, and depending on the industry as well. So if someone is a little bit more conservative, 12 months would be a good number for them.
Gag, differing views. Let's just go with no one size fits all. Look at your individual circumstances and at what life stage you are. Still to come with Daphne Tan from CMC Markets Singapore and Zach Ng from PhillipCapital. Shouldn't we be cutting all expenses, including investments and insurance? How can we maintain a balance between long-term financial goals and short-term liquidity needs during retrenchment? More in a moment.
Lens on Singapore is now bigger and better. The same deep dive exploration of socioeconomic and geopolitical issues which impact our lives here in Singapore and the region is now a video podcast. If watching a conversation is your thing, join Claressa Monteiro in monthly conversations about things that matter. Subscribe to the BT Lens On playlist in the podcast tab of the Business Times YouTube channel and start watching today. BT Lens On Singapore, now available in audio and video.
And now, back to Money Hacks from the Business Times.
You've been laid off. It's awful. You're doubting your qualifications and questioning your worth.
Well, retrenchment is definitely a very stressful thing to deal with. You're absolutely right. The first natural response is to see where we can cut the slack, or rather where we can tighten the belt. Unfortunately, a lot of people will be looking at their longer term plans, like retirement plan, which often comprises investments, insurance as well. All these are very essential things, which I don't think is wise for anybody to just say that I'm going to cut my investments, I'm going to put a stop to that, because there will be a downstream implication. A wiser thing to do is really to stay calm, speak to somebody who's a financial advisor that you trust, and to relook at your total finances, to take stock of things. Leverage on a outsider perspective to look at it from an objective perspective, and to give that professional opinion on what are the things that the person can restructure to that financial portfolio, so that a person who's going through retrenchment can actually be prepared for the future and at the same time meet the immediate liquidity needs. But of course, there's always a what if, right? Even though I say that it's not wise, but there is always that consideration. A person may not have actually planned his finances properly, and perhaps investment is really the only source of funds that he can tap on, to pay for the mortgages and all that. And in that kind of circumstances, it's an unfortunate thing that someone may have to tap onto the investment to fund all the daily needs.
It is good to review portfolios every 3 to 6 months, regardless, because not only personal sentiments will change, sometimes based on market uncertainty or your perception of market uncertainty, or if you're expecting, let's say, some families might be expecting a new child, but they're not sure how their job situation might be like in 3 to 6 months, in which case it's just good to do a 3 to 6 months review as a form of discipline, so there's no panic if anything happens.
One thing is certain. The planning needs to be done way before retrenchment happens. It takes discipline, but it's so necessary. Zach Ng from PhillipCapital has some thoughts.
I use buckets as an example. You have the short-term bucket where, a 12-month emergency fund. That is to fund any unexpected retrenchment that you need to tap on the money there. The second bucket, it could be something for the longer term, retirement and all that. So there is something that has a much longer time horizon, and it's a bucket that you don't want to touch, in the event of a retrenchment. Now, sitting somewhere in between, you can have something that is catering for the longer term needs, but yet, as a backup plan, it can serve as providing you with an emergency fund as well. It's about having this disciplined approach of having a free bucket approach towards your finances so that you're very clear where's your first line of defense. And if the first line of defense is all completely used up, at least you still have a second line of defense. And hopefully you don't use your third line of defense, which is for the longer term, retirement needs.
Makes sense. This way, you needn't liquidate and lose additional income from your investments and damage your long-term financial goals.
It's good to start early, but it's never too late. It's just that they might have to deal with a little bit of shock and panic, and they just need to stay calm, have a look at the action plan. But the first thing, if it's a surprise event, in which case they need to look at what areas can they pull money from, because liquidity would be the most important thing to look at that point in time. After they're able to identify those areas, they can then rejig their investments to help out accordingly.
It really depends on the circumstances when retrenchment happen. The most extreme scenario is when, if you remember the Great Depression, when there's no job out there, right? Everybody is just looking for a job, but there isn't any job. At that time, the markets are also in a very depressed state. If you were to just sell off everything, you're probably going to be realizing all the losses that you have incurred in your portfolio. So that's definitely not something wise to do, to completely sell off everything. But instead of that, it's really to relook at your investment objective and to look forward to see how else you can actually restructure the entire investment portfolio such that it can give you a bit more comfort, knowing that as long as you are able to last through the depression period, you are able to come out from it unscathed in terms of the investment returns. That's one of the scenario. Now, in other scenarios where it's just an unfortunate exercise of retrenchment due to company-specific circumstances, in general, in that kind of scenario, the broad economy should be pretty healthy. It shouldn't be too much of an issue to find the next job, as long as you are able to reskill yourself and adapt to a new career demands. I think in that kind of situation, I think we are a bit more fortunate. So perhaps there isn't really a strong need for anybody to, completely restructure that portfolio.
I know it's a little depressing to be thinking about what to do if retrenched, but it's better to be prepared than to be caught with your pants down. Next time, Budget 2025 is out, and we get help from experts to figure out what's in it for us and small businesses. A big thank you to Daphne Tan, Head of Business Development at CMC Markets Singapore, and Zach Ng, Financial Services Director, PhillipCapital. I'm Howie Lim. This has been Money Hacks from the Business Times.
This is a podcast by the Business Times. Find more BT podcasts at businesstimes.com.sg/podcasts. Or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast is meant to provide general information only. SPH Media accepts no liability for loss arising from any reliance on the podcast or use of third parties' products and services. Please consult professional advisors for independent advice.